In this lesson, we'll check out the must-have tool for developers, Git. Git is a distributed version control system for tracking changes in source code during software development. It is designed for coordinating work among programmers, but it can be used to track changes in any set of files. Let's create a repository for our boilerplate web app. We'll use GitHub, the most popular online service for Git repositories. GitHub is a place where you can store your Git repositories for distributed version control and source code management. GitHub also provides access control and several collaboration features such as bug tracking, feature requests, task management, and wikis for every project. Let's start with the basics of Git and GitHub. To start working with Git and GitHub, first of all, we have to install Git as a command line tool. You can find installation instructions at git-scm.com. You can find here how to install. You can find here binaries for different operating systems. You can find, for example, for Mac, for my laptop, the current version is 2.24.1. So just go here and download the binary, find instructions how to install the command line tool. When we install command line tool, to check that everything is installed and works properly, we can run a command git --version. Great. It shows that my version of Git is 2.19.0. Now we can move further. As a next step, we have to create a repository. Our main goal in this lesson is to create a repository on GitHub and to push our code to that repository and to make our project public. So everybody who will open our profile on GitHub will see that we have some project related to the blockchain. So let's go to GitHub. I already have an account and I'm already logged in. If you do not have an account, you feel free to create a new one. If you already have, then you just have to log in. So to create a repository, we can find here this plus sign and click new repository, or use the direct link github/new. Great. Now we can create a new repository. For example, let's call it, in our case, Web3 app. Description is optional, so I'll just set something, call this app about Web3. And in our case, let's make it public. This is required to make it public because at the end of the course, you have to submit the final project using GitHub, and you have to have at least one public repository with smart contracts, with JavaScript, and with all the project built together. So let's create this repository actually. Let's just press a button. And now we have some instructions how we can continue working with this repository. Before we do that, before we choose which of these options we are going to use, let's go back to the code, to actual code, to the project in Visual Studio Code. Here we have to initialize our GitHub repository. Let me explain. Here we will initialize the local version of GitHub repository. To do so, we have to run a command git init. It says that it reinitialized existing Git repository. Actually, because I created this repository before. So in your case, it will say that it initialized, not reinitialized, but just initialized first time. Now, we have to add files which Git will actually track. Git is tracking changes in files we're going to modify or create in the future. So we have to add those files. We have to add files to track. How we can do that? We can use a command git add -a to add all the files in this directory. But before we do that, we have to think about one thing. Here in our repository, we have a directory called node modules. Actually, we do not write any code inside this directory. In this directory, we have only dependencies. So we have to exclude these node modules from our repository. There is no reason to store all of these dependencies in our Git, in our source code track and management system. So how to do that? We have to create a file called .gitignore and to add here our directory, node_modules, and that's it. It allows us to say that Git, we will do something. For example, we will run a command git add -a, so it means git add all files in this directory, but please accept all the files and directories in the gitignore file. Great. Now we can run this command git add -a. There is nothing on my screen because I already did that. So in your case, the output of this command could not be the same. So now we just added files and we said to our local Git repository to track all these files. We have to do one more thing. We have to commit our changes. To commit our changes, we have to run a command git commit -m, which means with some message. In our case, let's say how to git and GitHub. Great. On branch master, it says that nothing to commit because I already did that actually. So if I run git log, I will see that there's already one commit with this message. So never mind. In your case, you will see some another output. You will see the list of files committed. To make sure that everything's okay, you can run at any time git status command. Nothing to commit, nothing to work with because I already did all these operations. So we just committed the file. It means that we just said, okay, this is our kind of snapshot for this moment. As a next step, we have to push our files to the GitHub because all these Git operations we did only locally on my laptop in my case. So now we have to push our code to the GitHub. Here is an option to push an existing repository. Great. First of all, we have to add a remote. This is the URL of my repository. Great, looks like everything's okay. And then we can say git push to the origin branch called master. Great. Branch master setup, track remote branch master. Great. Let's just refresh the page. Here is it. Now we have all our source codes on the GitHub. Here are commits. This was the first lesson. I also committed the second lesson. In this repository, in the future, you will be able to find all the lessons step by step. Like you can find the proper lesson using the commit message. So I highly recommend you to read more about Git if you are new to Git. But with this, we are done. The only thing I'd like to note that there are many tools to work with Git, not only the command line, there are UI tools from GitHub, for example, so you can use one of those tools as well, but we're not going to talk about it because this is a bit outside of the scope of the course. So feel free to use any best practice, feel free to read more about Git. You can find book here, for example, you can find many courses and interesting videos on YouTube. That's it. The GitHub repository is ready. Git is a very powerful tool and you can do awesome things with it. GitHub has become the irrefutable must-have tool for developers. And not only for developers, but there are also many authors who use Git and GitHub. I recommend using the Git SCM website or Pro Git book to learn more about it. In the next video, we will learn about a tool which is as necessary for the Waves ecosystem as GitHub is for developers.